By August 1940, the global consensus on how a state should punish its citizens was beginning to crack. For decades, the prevailing doctrine was straightforward. Prisons existed to exact revenge on criminals. But administrators in the United Provinces of India looked at the recidivism rates and realized that containment based purely on retribution was a mathematical failure. They confronted a stark statistical axiom: 98% of all the people sent to their penal institutions would eventually return to the free community. If almost every convict was destined for release, simply locking them up meant returning thousands of bitter, unemployable men back into society. The state needed to stop warehousing bodies and start, in their own words, reconstructing the broken fragments of human pottery. The blueprint for this pivot is preserved here: the 1940 report on the working of the United Provinces Jail Training School in Lucknow. The authors argued that scientific reform requires a specialized intelligence service. A civilian force required more than a uniform and a rifle to succeed. They needed the capacity for social analysis. The report captures the absurdity of the old system with a precise metaphor. Relying on untrained guards to execute reformatory work is like asking a blacksmith to set a broken bone, or a plumber to operate on a heart. To solve this, the United Provinces established a training school with a singular mission. They were going to professionalize the average prison guard, turning them from a turnkey into an educator, a role model, and an analyst. But designing a progressive curriculum is easy. Forcing a legacy workforce to absorb and execute that curriculum is where the theory collides with reality. The Lucknow experiment gives us a perfect case study in the mechanics of policy execution. It shows us exactly what happens when ambitious academic ideals meet the friction of the human beings tasked with carrying them out. The training school divided its incoming officers into two tiers: a 4-month intensive course for rank-and-file warders and a sweeping 9-month program for deputy jailers. The administration designed a deeply hybridized syllabus. They wanted to maintain strict military discipline while simultaneously injecting university-level social science into the Guard Corps. The social science pillar was massive. Candidates were expected to master penology, criminology, sociology, and psychology, with each of these subjects carrying a massive weight of 200 marks in the final evaluation. The curriculum demanded academic rigor. As the faculty list shows, the school drafted experts like Kali Prasad, a reader in psychology at Lucknow University, to lecture the guards directly. On the other side of the syllabus, British military instructors ran the tactical pillar. Guards were drilled in alarm parades, riot response, and the rigid protocols of safe custody. They also required technical proficiency in jail industries. Officers had to learn weaving, dyeing, and building maintenance so they could actively direct inmate labor. The forensic and medical components were equally broad, covering public health, hygiene, first aid, and the emerging science of fingerprint classification. They even embedded psychiatric and psychological treatment as a core competency, operating under the belief that guards needed to understand the hidden needs of a struggling mind. To ensure these men were internalizing the culture, the principal held an additional 200 discretionary marks to grade their sociability, general behavior, and discipline during hostel life. This syllabus functioned as a blueprint for a socio-medical professional, creating a role that had little in common with the traditional jailer. Then, the first class actually arrived on campus. 39 officers stepped off the train in August 1940, and the administration collided immediately with their own demographic reality. The principal tracked the raw data of this cohort, documenting exactly who they were trying to mold into these scientific agents of reform. Most warders were over 25. Many were significantly older, with some pushing 50 years of age, nearing the twilight of their physical careers. They were heavily rooted in rural lifestyles, and the vast majority were married men supporting households with multiple children. The critical failure point is captured in the classification data. This table breaks down the formal schooling of the men tasked with absorbing graduate-level sociology. The education levels for the warder class were staggeringly low. Several men had failed the 10th standard. Others had only achieved a 4th standard education. Some held reading proficiencies as low as the 3rd standard in Hindi or Urdu. There is an insurmountable cognitive distance between a 3rd-grade reading level and a university-style lecture on the intricate problems of penal psychology. The principal noted that these men had been out of touch with education for decades. They lacked the basic mental conditioning required to apply their minds to serious, abstract problems. Meanwhile, sitting in the exact same institution were the 20 deputy jailers, men who held bachelor's and master's degrees. This created a jarring two-tiered system inside the classroom. The ambitious modern syllabus was essentially trying to force an ocean of complex theory through the eye of a needle. The demographic profile of the workforce was a massive filter blocking the policy. After prolonged staff meetings, the faculty accepted that standard university teaching methods would fail completely. First-term exams revealed that both senior and junior officers suffered from a severe language handicap, which prevented them from assembling logic or coherence in their thoughts. You cannot test a guard on the theories of criminology if they lack the vocabulary to articulate human behavior. The administration pivoted. The principal wrote that the examination results revealed a tragic fact, forcing the teaching staff to adopt what he called compromising methods, requiring extreme patience. They downgraded the emphasis on pure written theory. Instead, they leaned heavily into practical demonstrations and real-time personality analysis to judge a guard's fitness for the job. The administration struggled to keep this intelligent service from feeling like the work of a blacksmith, emphasizing intellectual analysis over blunt containment. To build a bridge to the academic material, the staff relied on physical training. The British military instructors provided a familiar, structured pedagogical environment where the older men could succeed through sheer repetition. The school also weaponized the residential nature of the program. Hostel life was carefully supervised to force training in sociability, using the 24-hour environment to mold their character when lectures failed. For the harder sciences, they built museums of criminology and penology. When officers couldn't parse a sociology textbook, the staff gave them tactile evidence, like seized counterfeiting apparatuses, to make the concepts tangible. This was the reality of the Lucknow method. The pure, abstract theory conceived by high-level administrators had to surrender to the pragmatic, messy reality of the humans sitting at the desks. Despite the friction, the school held fast to its three primary objectives: improve individual efficiency, promote a professionalized service, and coordinate the various institutional departments. They refused to lower the graduation standards entirely. Trainees still had to secure a strict 40% in individual subjects and maintain a 50% aggregate to earn their certificate. The final term examination in April served as the ultimate threshold, testing whether the faculty's compromising methods had actually bridged the massive demographic gap. In his concluding remarks, the principal lays out the core thesis that makes this 1940 experiment so relevant to modern administration. Reform is entirely dependent on the specific personnel who carry it out. He writes, "No program, regardless of its excellence, will be effective unless it is translated into action by executive officers, guards, teachers, and other institutional personnel." He hoped this session would be the rock foundation for future penal reform. This is the paradox of any massive institutional change. A sophisticated philosophy of treatment is useless if you do not possess the workforce capable of implementing it. The Lucknow report serves as a timeless warning. Public policy does not survive on the strength of its ideas. It survives only if it can withstand the friction of the people doing the daily work. In 1940, tired, undereducated men in their 50s were handed a syllabus of sociology and tasked with implementing a scientific approach to prison management. Their struggle forces us to ask a difficult question. Can a state institution ever truly reform a broken person if it hasn't first figured out how to reform its own ranks?